My son looked me dead in the eyes at his graduation speech and said I was proof that some people shouldn't have children. 300 people heard it. I was in the front row wearing the only dress I owned. The dress was navy blue, polyester, from a Target clearance rack 3 years before. I had ironed it the night before with a travel iron I borrowed from my neighbor Greta, pressing each seam twice because I wanted it to look like something it wasn't. I had taken the 6:40 a.m. bus to get my hair done at a salon on Clement Street. Not a good salon, but a clean one, the kind where they ask if you want tea and mean it, because I had wanted, for once, to look like a mother whose child was about to be named valedictorian of Jefferson High School. I had sat in that chair for 40 minutes and watched a woman named Lynn pin my hair up in a way I could never replicate and thought, this is a good day. This is the day everything gets to mean something. I was in my seat by 9:15. The ceremony didn't start until 10. I sat in the front row because a woman from the school office had pulled me aside 2 weeks earlier and said, with genuine warmth, that the front row was reserved for valedictorian families. She had said it the way people say things they are proud to say. I had thanked her twice and then gone to the nurse's station bathroom and stood there with the water running, unable to explain to myself what I was feeling, which I now understand was the specific vertigo of something you have worked toward for so long that its arrival no longer feels real. Marcus was 18 years old. He had been accepted to Yale University on a need-based scholarship package that covered 83% of his tuition. The remaining 17%, $14,200 per year, was something we had been managing together through a combination of my overtime shifts and a financial aid supplemental form that required my tax information, my employment verification, my signature in 4 places, and my authorization as the primary household income earner. The paperwork had been sitting on our kitchen table for 11 days. The deadline was 3 weeks out. I had been working nights all month and had told Marcus repeatedly that I would get to it, that it was on my list, that I just needed one clear afternoon to sit down and read through every page carefully because I am not a person who signs things without reading them. His name is Marcus, valedictorian, Yale-bound, and for the last 4 years, he'd been sharpening his teeth on me every chance he got. I want to be precise about what that looked like, because it would be easy to describe it the wrong way. It would be easy to say he was a difficult teenager, that all teenagers are cruel, that I should have known better than to take it personally. But the cruelty Marcus practiced was not the blunt, unthinking cruelty of a boy who hadn't yet learned how words land. It was precise. It was calibrated. He understood exactly how much force to apply and where. It started in 9th grade, small enough that I talked myself out of it every time. Mom, your questions are embarrassing. This was at a parent-teacher conference at Jefferson, where I had asked his AP World History teacher to clarify what the primary source analysis rubric was looking for, because I was trying to understand how to help him at home. The teacher had answered without any sign that the question was strange. Marcus had walked out ahead of me into the parking lot and said it again. Your questions are embarrassing. I had let it go. He was 14. He was adjusting to high school. I let it go. By 10th grade, it had a different texture. Mom, don't talk to my friends. This was at a track meet at Lincoln High, a school 40 minutes away by transit, where I had taken 2 buses to watch him run the 400-meter and where I had said hello to 2 of his teammates because that is what you do when you are standing next to people in shared bleachers. He had found me afterward near the water table, glanced once at his teammates, and said it flat and quiet. Don't talk to my friends. I had driven home. I had borrowed Greta's car for that, in complete silence, and told myself he was embarrassed the way teenagers are embarrassed, that it would pass, that this is what I had signed up for when I decided to raise a child alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on a nurse's salary. By junior year, it had a shape. Mom, can you at least try to dress like a normal person? He said this on a Sunday morning in November when I came into the kitchen in my scrubs at 7 a.m. after a 12-hour night shift. I had not slept. I had not eaten. I had driven home in the fog with the windows cracked so the cold air would keep me awake. And I had come inside and turned on the kitchen light, and there he was, sitting with 3 friends I had not known were spending the night. And he had looked at me in my scrubs, the same 3 scrubs I had owned for 5 years, washed so many times the color had gone soft, and said it, try to dress like a normal person. I'm a nurse, I worked nights, I skipped meals, I wore the same 3 uniforms for 5 years so he could have the right laptop, the right calculator, the right everything. The laptop was a MacBook Pro 14-inch, purchased in the fall of his sophomore year when he told me the school's loaner Chromebooks weren't sufficient for the AP Computer Science coursework. It cost $1,340 after tax. I had put $800 on a credit card I had not yet paid off and covered the rest from savings. The calculator was a TI Inspire CX2, which his AP Calculus teacher had recommended, and which cost $119 at the Westfield Best Buy where I had taken a bus on a Tuesday afternoon specifically to buy it. The right everything. The SAT prep course through a company called Achievers in the Sunset District, $650 for 8 sessions. The junior year college counselor his school connected him with after he made the honor roll. No charge, but I had taken a Thursday afternoon off without pay to attend the intake meeting because I thought it mattered that a parent be present. The blazer he wore to his Harvard and Yale interviews, $280 at a Men's Warehouse on Van Ness, altered twice because the first alteration wasn't right. I sat in a plastic chair outside the fitting room both times, watching the tailor pin the fabric at the shoulders, thinking this is what it looks like when you do everything correctly. And he stood at that microphone and called me stupid. He said his biggest obstacle in life was being raised by someone who couldn't help with 6th grade math. He thanked his teachers for being the real parents he needed. He said, and I will never forget this, that watching me struggle with basic concepts taught him what not to become. I want to describe what that room sounded like when he said it. I want to give you the precise acoustic quality of 300 people going so quiet that you could hear the ventilation system in the gymnasium ceiling, a low and steady hum that I had not noticed before and could not stop noticing after. I was in the front row. The podium was maybe 30 feet away. He was looking directly at me when he said the word stupid, not past me, not at some middle distance, at me. And he had a small smile on his face, not a cruel smile, not a triumphant one, but the controlled, practiced expression of someone who has delivered a line he has rehearsed many times. The kind of smile you make when you know the line is going to land and you want to seem like you didn't know. The auditorium went silent. A woman behind me touched my shoulder. I didn't move. Couldn't. I just sat there while my son walked off stage like he'd given the speech of his life. He came home that night drunk on applause, grinning, asking if I'd handled the Yale enrollment paperwork yet. The papers were on the kitchen table, financial aid forms, required signatures. My tax information, his entire future, wrapped up in documents only I could authorize. Deadline, 3 days. He stood in the kitchen doorway in his dress shirt tie loosened, jacket over one arm, the picture of a young man who had just had a very good day. He had a way of standing when he was pleased with himself, one shoulder slightly forward, head tilted at an angle that suggested he was already bored by whatever came next. I had watched that posture develop over 3 years and had told myself it was confidence. I had been proud of it once. I looked at him and said, no. He laughed. Classic. I'll walk you through it tomorrow, like teaching a toddler. I said, stupid people probably shouldn't make such important decisions. What I can tell you is that my hands were steady, that I had been a nurse for 14 years, and I had held hands through codes, and I had stayed in rooms where people were dying, and I had not looked away, and something in that training had given me the ability to make my face do nothing at precisely the moment when doing nothing is the only leverage you have. I looked at my son, and I felt my hands at my sides, and I thought, I know how to wait. I locked the papers in my nightstand and went to bed. He pounded on my door until 2 a.m. I didn't answer. The pounding was rhythmic at first, then irregular, then rhythmic again, then silent for long enough that I thought he'd given up, and then it started again at a different tempo that I recognized as desperation rather than anger. I lay in the dark and counted the gaps between knocks the way you count contractions, timing them, noting when they slowed, waiting for them to stop. At 2:14 a.m. they stopped. I lay there for another 20 minutes before I fell asleep. The next morning, I went to work like nothing happened. My coworker Diana found me crying in the break room and listened to everything. The years of contempt, the humiliating speech, the way he looked directly at me when he said it. Diana had been a nurse for 22 years. She was the kind of person who carried extra snacks in her bag for the other nurses on long shifts and who remembered without being told which of her patients had no family coming. She had 3 adult children of her own and spoke about them the way you speak about things you have earned, slowly, with full knowledge of the cost. She sat across from me in the break room at SF General and did not say anything for a long time after I finished. She held my hand and said, any mother would do the same. That felt like oxygen. My sister Sandra showed up at the hospital at lunch. Marcus had called her sobbing at 6 a.m. I should tell you about Sandra because she is important to this story and because she would not want me to describe her accurately, which is all the more reason to do it. Sandra is 4 years older than me and has, for as long as I can remember, had a way of making her concern sound like assessment. She married well, a software engineer named Patrick who was recruited out of Cal Poly, and they live in a 4-bedroom in Walnut Creek with a yard and a Costco membership and the particular confidence of people for whom most things have worked out. She had always been kind to me in the way that people are kind when they have more than you and want credit for noticing. She had told me, when Marcus was accepted to Yale, that she always knew he had it in him, as if her belief had been a contributing factor. He's brilliant, she said. You can't let hurt feelings ruin his future. The video had been taken from the 4th or 5th row, on an angle that put Marcus's face and frame and my back visible at the left edge. You could hear everything. The ventilation hum, the precise moment the room went quiet. The controlled, unhurried delivery of the word stupid. Someone had already posted it to a parent Facebook group for the school district, where it had been shared 47 times by the time Diana showed it to me on her lunch break. I had not gone looking for it. It had come to me. I watched her face. I watched the exact second she heard him call me stupid, watched her go completely still. When it ended, she sat there staring at the black screen. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. I don't know yet, but I don't know yet was accurate in the specific sense that I had not yet made a final decision about the paperwork. And I had learned over the course of 14 years in a profession where precision is the difference between a correct dosage and a fatal one, that you do not say things you cannot take back. The deadline came at 5 p.m. At 4:58, my phone started buzzing. Marcus, over and over. I silenced every call at exactly 5 o'clock. I watched the second hand sweep past 12. Something in my chest tightened, then released. It was not satisfaction, it was not grief. It was the specific physical sensation of a decision becoming permanent. The way a door sounds when the latch catches all the way rather than halfway. Done. Irrevocable. I had not signed the papers. The Yale enrollment deadline had passed, and I felt that fact settle into my body with the weight of something I had chosen deliberately, rather than something that had happened to me. Diana found me at 5:15 and put her hand on my shoulder without saying a word. Everyone at the hospital knew what had just happened. When I got home, Marcus was pacing the living room, red-eyed, frantic. "I've ruined everything," he said. "Yale is saying my spot is in jeopardy. Why would you do this? What is wrong with you?" He was wearing the Yale sweatshirt he'd bought the day the acceptance letter came, and his face had the particular look of someone who has never before experienced the specific sensation of consequences, the bewildering feeling of cause and effect operating in a direction he had not anticipated. He was bright enough to understand what had happened. He was not yet experienced enough to understand why. I turned around and asked him one question: "Did you call them stupid too, or just me?" He stopped, then he started crying, not the frustrated tears from the night before, real sobs. The kind that shake your whole body. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "It wasn't supposed to sound like that. There was so much pressure, I needed a story, a narrative, something that would land." "You planned it," I said. He looked up. "The school told me, Marcus, you submitted a different speech for review. The one you actually gave, they'd never seen it. You wrote it. You approved it. You looked at me in that audience and read those words on purpose." The color left his face. Let me tell you how I knew. The principal at Jefferson, a man named Gerald Okafor, who had been in education for 25 years and who I had met exactly twice, once at a parent information night and once at a student achievement reception in October, had called my cell phone at 6:22 p.m. on the night of the graduation, while Marcus was still somewhere celebrating. Gerald Okafor had not called to apologize on behalf of the school. He had called because he was furious, and because in his 25 years he had never had a valedictorian deliver an unauthorized speech, and because the speech Marcus had submitted for administrative review, a speech about overcoming academic adversity and finding mentorship, was a completely different document from the one Marcus had delivered. Gerald Okafor had the submitted speech in a folder on his desk. He had read me 4 lines from it over the phone. None of those 4 lines appeared in what Marcus said at that podium. "The papers are still in my nightstand," I said, "and I haven't decided anything." His hands were shaking. "Mom, the extended deadline is in 2 weeks. You have to. I don't have to do anything." The extended deadline, this was something Marcus knew about, that he had not told me, which I had discovered that afternoon when I called the Yale Office of Undergraduate Financial Aid directly and spoke with a woman named Patricia who was patient and thorough, and who explained that the Supplemental Financial Aid Authorization Form had a standard 14-day extension window available to any student who requested it in writing. Marcus had not mentioned this. Not once in the 11 days the paperwork had been sitting on our kitchen table. Not in any of the 47 calls he had made to my silenced phone that afternoon. He had let me believe that 5 p.m. was the final wall, because a final wall suited a particular version of the story he was telling, the one where I was the obstacle, the one where my slowness and my ignorance were the primary forces acting on his life. That was enough. That night, his girlfriend Priya knocked on our door. She didn't know Marcus was home. She looked at me with red eyes and said she'd broken up with him. Said she'd watched the video and couldn't stay with someone who treated his mother that way. Priya was 19, a year older than Marcus, studying public health at SF State. She had been in our apartment many times. She had always been polite to me with a specific quality of politeness that I now understand was not simply good manners, but was a kind of apology she had been making in advance on his behalf for things she had seen and was not sure how to address. Then she said something I didn't expect. "He told me there's something else. Something he did that you don't know about yet." She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure whether to say it. Something worse than the speech. She sat on the couch where Marcus had been sitting 20 minutes earlier and held a glass of water with both hands and took a breath and told me about the letter. In October of the previous fall, 8 months before the graduation, Marcus had applied for a community scholarship through the San Francisco Education Foundation. The scholarship was worth $12,000, spread over 4 years. It was need-based. It required, among other documents, a statement of household financial circumstances and a letter of support from a family member. Marcus had written that letter himself. He had signed my name. Priya had seen a draft of it on his laptop in November. She had asked him about it. He had told her it was fine, that he had permission, that he had just been saving me the trouble of writing something I wouldn't know how to write well. She had told him it didn't seem right. He had told her not to worry about it. She had been worrying about it for 8 months. The letter described our household finances with accurate details. My salary, my rent, my shift hours, but it also included a paragraph about my limited capacity to provide academic guidance, and my dependence on Marcus to manage household administrative tasks, which was his language, not mine. The letter presented me in my own voice as incapable. It had been submitted to the San Francisco Education Foundation under my forged signature, and Marcus had received the scholarship, $12,000. He had not told me. I asked Priya if she still had the screenshot she'd taken of the draft. She did. She had sent it to herself from his laptop that November and saved it, she said, because she'd had a feeling she might need it eventually. She looked at me then with something in her eyes that was not guilt exactly, but was adjacent to it. The expression of someone who has waited too long and knows it and is trying to decide if the waiting can be forgiven. I told her it could. I meant it. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the same table where the Yale papers had been sitting for 11 days. I had a glass of water and the photo on my phone that Priya had sent me, the screenshot of a letter written in my name, and I sat there until I could hear Marcus moving in his bedroom. And then I called Diana. Diana had a cousin named Yvonne, who was a family law attorney in Oakland. I want to be specific about Yvonne because she was the hinge on which everything else turned, and she deserves precision. Yvonne had been practicing for 17 years, mostly family law, but she had handled fraud and defamation cases as ancillary matters and had enough familiarity with document fraud to know immediately when Diana called her at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday what she was hearing. I spoke to Yvonne for 42 minutes that night. She did not soften anything. She said, "What you're describing is check fraud and forgery, both of which are criminal statutes in California regardless of the family relationship and regardless of the amount." She said the $12,000 figure was, while not enormous, well above the felony threshold for fraud in California, which sits at $950. She said that the forged signature on a scholarship application submitted to a nonprofit foundation could also create civil liability and potentially federal implications if the foundation received any federal pass-through funding, which many do. She said, "Don't confront him. Don't tell him what you know. Call me in the morning." I went to bed at 12:30 a.m. Marcus's light was still on under his door. I did not knock. The next day I did 4 things. I called Yvonne and retained her for $1,500, which was most of what I had in my personal account after rent. I called Gerald Okafor at Jefferson and asked for a formal written record of the speech submission discrepancy, the original submitted speech versus what Marcus had delivered. And Gerald said he had already begun that documentation because the school had its own liability concerns. I called the San Francisco Education Foundation's main line and asked to speak with whoever handled scholarship verification. And I called my bank. The foundation call took the longest. I spoke with a woman named Kathy who at first could not discuss specific scholarship awards with me, and then, once I identified myself as the person whose signature appeared on a document I had not signed, became very quiet and very cooperative. She told me she would need to escalate the matter internally. She told me the scholarship disbursements had been paid directly to Marcus in 2 installments, $6,000 in September and $6,000 in January. She told me that all scholarship records were kept for 7 years and that their documentation would be available if needed for a legal proceeding. She did not say this with alarm. She said it the way people in administrative roles say things they have been trained to say, carefully covering the organization. I thanked her and hung up. Yvonne called me back at 3:30 that afternoon. She had spoken with a colleague in the San Francisco DA's district office. She told me that the DA's office would review a referral, but that my civil route was actually stronger in the short term. You have a forged document, a direct financial beneficiary, and a screenshot of the draft in his own hand, she said. That's a good civil case. That's potentially a very good civil case. She paused. What do you want out of this? I want him to understand what he did, I said, and I want the scholarship money returned to whoever should have had it. Meanwhile, I had 3 more conversations that mattered. The first was with Gerald Okafor, who provided a formal written statement on Jefferson High letterhead documenting that Marcus had submitted a pre-reviewed speech on May 18th and had delivered an entirely different unreviewed speech on May 21st. And that this deviation from school policy was being referred to the district's Student Conduct Review Board. The second was with my own mother, who lives in Sacramento and who had watched the graduation video on her phone and had called Marcus twice without getting an answer. My mother is 71 years old and worked as a home health aide for 30 years. When I told her about the letter, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I always thought he was too comfortable." The third conversation was with Sandra. I have not called Sandra. Sandra called me 10 days after the graduation, after she had apparently spent that time thinking. She called me on a Wednesday evening, and when I answered, she said without preamble, "I talked to Marcus." I waited. She said he told me he'd been writing your letters for years, that you needed help with paperwork, that you had trouble with reading comprehension. I held the phone very still. She said, "I don't know why I didn't question that before. I'm questioning it now." She was crying, not loudly, the contained kind. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I went to that hospital." I told her she could provide a witness statement if asked. She said she would. The civil hearing was 6 weeks after the graduation at the San Francisco Superior Court. I want to tell you about the room, the way a courtroom looks when everything in it is arranged around a piece of paper. Yvonne sat beside me in a gray suit that she had clearly worn many times before, which I found reassuring in a way I couldn't quite name. The foundation had sent a representative, a quiet man named Douglas, who wore a badge on a lanyard and carried a manila folder and sat 3 rows back. Gerald Okafor was there. Diana was there. Marcus came in with an attorney, a young man in a new-looking suit who Patrick had paid for because Patrick had decided this was a family matter worth supporting, and because I think he needed to believe that paying for the attorney was a form of neutrality. Marcus sat down across the room and did not look at me, which was a choice I noticed. He had a posture I recognized. One shoulder slightly forward, head at the tilted angle. He was in control, or he wanted the room to believe he was. His attorney, his name was filed as Ryan Chu, made an opening argument that leaned heavily on the concept of family collaboration. That Marcus had acted with a reasonable belief that he had implicit authorization, that he had written the letter as an act of assistance to a parent who struggled with written communication. It was a well-structured argument. I will give him that. It sounded almost convincing the way Marcus's smile had looked almost casual at the podium. Almost. Yvonne responded by introducing 3 documents. The first was Priya's screenshot of the draft letter, time-stamped November 14th, 7 months before the civil proceeding. The draft contained a handwritten note in the margins. Marcus had been editing it in an annotation tool, which read, "Make sure this part doesn't sound like me, not like her, like me, like Marcus." The second was an email Marcus had sent to the foundation in September, 8 months prior, confirming receipt of the first disbursement. The email confirmed his sole control of the scholarship funds. It referenced his independent household management in a context that made clear he had positioned himself to the foundation as operating without significant parental involvement. The third was the Jefferson High written statement from Gerald Okafor, documenting the speech discrepancy. This was not directly relevant to the civil fraud matter, but Yvonne introduced it as evidence of a pattern of conduct, which I now understand is a legal term with specific weight, not just a phrase. And the judge allowed it. Ryan Chu objected to the third document. The judge considered it for a moment. Then she allowed it. Marcus's face did not change when the documents were read into the record, but something happened around his eyes. A tightening that I recognized because I had been watching his face for 18 years and I knew every small adjustment it made. His shoulder came down very slightly, by about half an inch. I had seen that adjustment before. It was the posture he made when he had realized too late that he had miscalculated something. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When she returned, she ruled in my favor on the primary civil count, fraud and forgery. She ordered the full $12,000 to be repaid to the San Francisco Education Foundation with a 7% interest surcharge, totaling $12,840. She also issued a formal finding of fraudulent misrepresentation, which Yvonne told me afterward would appear on any civil record search of Marcus's name. She said it without any particular expression. I said, "Good." The ruling was on a Friday. On the following Monday, the San Francisco Education Foundation notified Marcus that he was permanently ineligible for any future foundation scholarships or grants, a designation that extended to over 40 affiliated programs. On Wednesday of that same week, Yale University's Dean of Students office sent Marcus a letter. Yvonne had forwarded the civil ruling to Yale's Legal Affairs office as a courtesy, stating that his admission was under review pending a student conduct hearing, and that his enrollment had been deferred pending the outcome of that hearing. The letter was 4 paragraphs. It was, as these things go, devastating in its politeness. Marcus called me from outside the apartment that Wednesday evening. He did not knock. He called my phone, and when I answered, he said, in a voice I had not heard from him before, not the performing voice, not the contempt voice, but something underneath those, something genuinely young. "Mom, what do I do?" "You call Yale's Dean of Students office," I said, "and you tell them the truth, all of it. And then you write a letter to the San Francisco Education Foundation. And then you figure out how to repay $12,840, and I'm not helping you with that part." There was a long silence. "Is there anything," he said, "that you want me to say to you?" I had thought about this question for 6 weeks. I had sat with it the way you sit with a question when you know the answer is going to cost you something, when you know that whatever you say is going to determine the shape of what comes next. I had not talked myself into anything. I had not arrived at a lesson or a wisdom or a clean understanding of what the previous 18 years had meant. I had just sat with it the way I'd sat with the papers on the kitchen table, and waited. "I want you to understand," I said, "that I read at an 11th grade level. I always have. I was the fastest student in my LVN program, and I passed my RN boards on the first attempt, and I managed medication protocols for 24 patients per shift. I know exactly what I am. I have always known. What I wanted you to know was something different, and the fact that you didn't understand that tells me the education wasn't finished. It is now 14 months later. I am a night charge nurse at SF General, which is a promotion I received in November and which came with an $8,400 annual salary increase. I have the same apartment because I chose it, because Greta is next door and Greta makes soup when the fog is bad, and I think that matters more than square footage. Diana and I have lunch on Tuesdays when our shifts align. Sandra called me in October to say that Marcus had enrolled at San Francisco City College, was working part-time at a restaurant on Valencia Street, and had taken out a personal loan to begin repaying the foundation. She said he seemed different. I told her I was glad. Priya sends me a text occasionally, short ones. "How are you doing?" Sometimes a photo of something she's seen that she thinks I'd like. Last month, she sent me a picture of a mural on Mission Street that had a nurse in it. I sent her back a thumbs up emoji and then stared at the photo for a while in the break room with my coffee getting cold. The Yale sweatshirt is still in mine. I had it dry cleaned after the graduation, which cost $14, and then I hung it back up because I didn't know what else to do with something you ironed twice for a day that turned out to be something else. I still have the nightstand.